By 2 in the afternoon, the offer had reached $500,000, and the Ferrari still would not start. It sat in the center of the service bay at Vanguard Motor Cars, the most exclusive exotic car facility in the city. Glass and polished concrete, and a clientele that did not ask the price of anything a Ferrari. Racing red, $400,000 of it, with its engine cover up and its doors open, and 5 of the best independent exotic mechanics in the state standing around it in various states of defeat. They had been at it for 3 days. They had laptops and factory tools and decades of combined experience. And the car would crank and catch and die, throwing a wall of anti-theft and immobilizer warnings across its screens, and not one of them could make it run. Gwen Harlow stood in the middle of the bay in a suit worth more than 2 of the mechanics' cars, and she was done being patient. "Let me make this very simple," she said, and her voice carried, because she had built a career on her voice carrying. "I don't care about your hourly rates, and I don't care about your diagnostic procedures. I care about results." So, she looked around the bay, at the 5 best mechanics money could summon. $500,000. Right now. To any mechanic in this building who can fix my Ferrari. It landed like a thrown rock. $500,000. The mechanics looked at each other, and looked at the car, and you could see them want it, God. You could see them want it, and you could also see, in their faces, the knowledge that they had already tried everything they knew, and that wanting the money would not make the car start. That was the moment a man walked across the back of the bay, carrying a small canvas tool bag, holding the hand of a little girl of about 7, on his way to the exit. He had not come for the Ferrari. He'd come to let a customer back into a Mercedes they'd locked their keys inside, out in the lot, a 15-minute job, and he was leaving. But he'd heard the offer, and more than that, he'd heard the sound the Ferrari was making as it cranked and died, and something in him had slowed down, the way it does when a person hears a problem they recognize. $500,000, the man repeated, half to himself. For that? Gwen Harlow turned. She took in the canvas bag, the work clothes, the little girl. "Are you a mechanic?" "No, ma'am," the man said. "I'm a locksmith." A couple of the mechanics actually laughed tired, bitter laughs. "Then it doesn't concern you," Gwen said, turning back. "I said mechanics." "Sure," the man said. "Except your car doesn't have a mechanical problem." He set down his bag. "I've been listening to it for about a minute. That's not a sick engine. That's a car that can't find its key." He looked at her, calm, almost apologetic. "Oh, I can fix this in about 30 seconds. And it won't cost you $500,000. It'll cost you a battery the size of a nickel." The bay went quiet, and the little girl beside him looked up at the woman in the expensive suit and said, helpfully, "My dad fixes the ones nobody else can." Gwen Harlow had built a $4 billion company on a single, ruthless, and largely correct idea that people do what they're paid to do. Her company was called Lever, and what it sold, underneath all the technology, was incentives. Lever designed the systems that move human behavior at scale, the reward structures, the points, the bonuses, the carefully engineered nudges that get a driver to take one more ride, a worker to hit one more target, a customer to come back one more time. Gwen had understood, earlier and more clearly than almost anyone, that you do not have to change what people believe or feel. You only have to change what they're rewarded for, and the behavior follows. Incentives are destiny. Get the incentives right, and people will do anything. It had made her enormously rich, and it had made her, in a quiet way she'd stopped noticing, profoundly cynical about human beings. Because if your whole life's work is the science of moving people with rewards, you start to see rewards everywhere, behind everything. You start to believe not as a theory, but as a bone-deep certainty that there is no such thing as a person who acts without an angle. That kindness is reputation management. That generosity is tax strategy or guilt or signaling. That everyone has a price, and the only honest people are the ones who tell you theirs. Gwen Harlow did not think this made her a cynic. She thought it made her a realist. She thought the people who believed otherwise were simply too sentimental or too sheltered to see the machinery underneath. And she had her reasons. That was the part the magazines never got. She hadn't been born believing people had a price. The world had taught her, the way it teaches everyone their deepest beliefs through betrayal. A business partner in the early years, who'd been her closest friend, and had stolen from her the moment the numbers got big. A wave of people who'd appeared the instant she became wealthy, warm and devoted, every one of them eventually revealing the ask underneath. A man she'd loved who, it turned out, had loved the access. Over and over, life had shown Gwen Harlow that the warmth came with an invoice, and she had finally protected herself the only way that worked, by assuming the invoice from the start, by deciding that everyone had a price, and simply paying it up front, so she could never be surprised by it again. The bounty was the purest expression of this. She did not say, "Please help me." She did not look for the one right person and trust them. That would have required believing in something she'd decided didn't exist. Instead, she did the only thing she trusted. She made the reward enormous, and let self-interest do the rest. $500,000. Pull the lever. Watch the behavior follow. It had never failed her. It was, she believed, simply how the world worked. The Ferrari mattered for reasons she'd never have admitted. It had been a gift to herself. The year lever went public, the trophy, the proof, the "I made it." And now it sat humiliating her in a glass garage, a $400,000 symbol of her success that would not even start. And Gwen Harlow could not stand a problem her money couldn't solve, because if money couldn't solve it, then the one thing she'd built her entire life and worldview around had a hole in it, and she could not look at that hole. So she'd raised the price, and raised it again, $500,000, certain that somewhere in that bay, the right incentive would pull the right behavior out of someone, because that was how people worked. She had no framework at all for the man who was about to fix her car in 30 seconds, and then refuse the money. He was, in the most literal sense, impossible, and he was about to walk straight through the center of everything she believed. Pete Nowak unlocked cars for a living, and he had unlocked his whole life around a decision most people thought he was crazy to make. He was 45. He ran a one-man mobile locksmith operation, Nowak Lock and Key. A van, a phone, and 30 years of accumulated knowledge about the single most overlooked system in every modern vehicle on Earth. The way a car decides whether it should let you in and whether it should start. People thought of locksmiths as the guys you call when you lock your keys in your car. And Pete did plenty of that. But the real work, the work almost nobody understood, was electronic keys, fobs, transponders, immobilizers. The whole invisible handshake that happens between a key and a car 1,000 times a day. Pete knew that handshake the way a cardiologist knows a heartbeat. He knew every way it could fail. And he knew the thing that the world's best mechanics, for all their brilliance, often didn't fully know, because mechanics think about the car. And half the time the problem isn't the car at all. It's the key. It's the conversation between the key and the car. And that was Pete's entire world. He was not a wealthy man. Locksmithing pays a decent, ordinary living, the kind that covers the bills and the van payment, and a modest house, and Pete had never wanted more than that, which made him an odd duck in a country that's always selling you more. What Pete wanted, he already had, and her name was Rosie. Rosie was 7, and she was not, by blood, his. 5 years ago, Pete Nowak had been a single man in his late 30s with a steady trade and a quiet life and a feeling, growing for years, that the life was a little too quiet, that he had room in it, and time in it, and love in it, going unused. He had thought about it for a long time, and then he had done the thing that made his brother ask if he'd lost his mind, and made the people at the agency look at him twice because single men did not usually walk through that door. He had become a foster parent, and the second child they placed with him had been a silent, watchful 2-year-old named Rosie, who had already been through more than a person should be through, and who had looked at Pete on the first night with eyes that had learned not to expect anything from anyone. He had adopted her 11 months later. People asked him about it, sometimes in the careless way people ask things. That's so generous. But a single guy, taking that on, by yourself? What made you do it? And underneath the question, Pete could always hear the real one, the one they didn't quite say. What do you get out of it? As though there had to be a return, as though a man would only take on a child for some reason that benefited him. And Pete never had a good answer, because the question was built wrong. He hadn't done it to get anything. He'd done it because there was a kid who needed a dad, and he had a dad's worth of love sitting around unused. And putting those two facts together wasn't generosity or sacrifice or anything that needed a reason. It was just the obvious thing. Water runs downhill. Love goes where it's needed. There's no angle in it. There's no price. Rosie had become, in 5 years, the most open-hearted child Pete had ever known, which was its own small miracle, given where she'd started. She gave things away. She helped strangers. She'd hand her snack to a kid who didn't have one without a flicker of calculation, because nobody had ever taught her that kindness was supposed to come with a return. And Pete worked hard, every day, to make sure nobody ever did. She came on jobs with him on the weekends, which was why she was holding his hand in a glass garage that Saturday afternoon, when a billionaire offered $500,000 to fix a car that any locksmith could have told her wasn't broken. Pete had heard the crank and die. He'd heard the immobilizer fighting the engine, and he'd known, the way you know your own name, exactly what was wrong, because it was the most ordinary thing in his ordinary world, dressed up in a $400,000 costume. The car couldn't find its key, and the woman who believed everyone had a price was about to meet a man who would fix it for nothing, and a little girl who'd never learned the lie. "Say that again," Gwen Harlow said. "It can't find its key." "That's right." Pete walked closer to the Ferrari, unhurried, the little girl's hand still in his. "Can I ask you something? When it stopped working, did it die all at once? Or did it get flaky first? Start fine some days, then not others. Crank and catch and die, like it's doing now, but then sometimes turn over normal and you'd think it was fixed?" Gwen frowned, because that was exactly it. It was intermittent, she admitted. For about 2 weeks. It would be fine, then it wouldn't, then it would, then it just stopped. Completely. Why? "Because that's the tell," Pete said. "That right there. A mechanical problem doesn't come and go like that. A bad sensor, a bad coil. A fuel problem, they get worse. But they don't flip a coin every morning. You know what does flip a coin every morning?" He let it sit. "A dying battery in your key fob. When it's strong, the car hears the key. Everything's fine. When it's weak, the car can only hear it sometimes, and when it can't hear it, the anti-theft assumes someone's trying to steal it, locks everything down, and throws exactly the wall of immobilizer faults your guys have been staring at for 3 days. As the fob battery died over 2 weeks, your car heard the key less and less, until one morning it couldn't hear it at all, and then it stopped completely." He nodded at the 5 mechanics. "These are good people, but they've spent 3 days diagnosing the car, because they're mechanics and the car is what they fix. Nobody diagnosed the key, because the key's not a car part, it's a locksmith part. One of the mechanics, the lead, A serious man named Reyes, who'd been on the car all 3 days, went very still, because he'd just watched a stranger explain, in 90 seconds, a thing he should have caught and hadn't, for the most human of reasons. It had never occurred to him to suspect the key in the owner's purse. That's Reyes started. We checked the immobilizer system. We checked the antenna ring, the receiver. You checked the car side of the conversation, Pete said, not unkindly. Did anybody check the key's side? Did anybody put a fresh battery in the fob? The silence answered him. Gwen Harlow looked at the locksmith, and at her 5 summoned experts, and at her humiliating red car, and something in her was off balance, in a way she didn't like. If it's that simple, she said, and there was an edge in it, almost an accusation. Why didn't 5 of the best mechanics in the state figure it out in 3 days? Because it's not simple, Pete said. It's humble. Those aren't the same. A humble problem hides from smart people, because smart people are looking for a problem worthy of them. You've got a $400,000 car and a $500,000 reward, and 5 experts. Everything about this situation says the answer has to be big and complicated. So nobody looks at the $50 battery and the key. The answer was too small for the room. He shrugged. I'm a locksmith. Small is all I do. He crouched down to Rosie's level. Want to help me show them? Rosie nodded, very serious, the way she got when given a job. And Gwen Harlow watched a man kneel on her dealership's polished floor beside his 7-year-old and reach into his canvas bag, not for a laptop, not for a factory tool, but for a coin-sized battery and a small flat blade, and she had the dawning destabilizing sense that she was about to watch $500,000 be made irrelevant by something she could buy at a drugstore. He held out his hand. I'll need the key, ma'am. Gwen's assistant produced it, the Ferrari's fob, a beautiful thing, red leather and the prancing horse, the key to a $400,000 car. Pete turned it over in his fingers like it was any other fob in the world, which to him it was. First, he said, to the whole room, but really to Rosie and the mechanics, teaching the way good tradesmen always teach. I'll prove it's the key before I fix it. Every modern car like this has a backup for exactly this situation. When your fob battery's dead, there's a spot, usually marked, where you hold the fob right against the car, and it'll read the key directly, no battery needed. He opened the door, found the spot, held the dead fob against it. If I'm right, the car will start this time, because now it can hear the key, even though the fob's still dead. Watch. He pressed the start button. The Ferrari fired instantly. Smooth. Perfect. The wall of warnings vanished. The engine that 5 experts could not coax to life for 3 days settled into a flawless idle. A sound went through the bay. That's not fixed, Pete said over the engine, holding up a hand. That's proof. The car was never sick. It just couldn't hear its key. Now he shut it off, the actual fix. And here was the 30 seconds. He popped the fob open with the flat blade 3 seconds. He pried out the old coin cell battery 5 seconds. He looked at it, held it up. Dead. Reads almost nothing. He pressed a fresh one in from his bag 5 seconds. He snapped the fob shut 2 seconds. He handed it back to Gwen. Now do it the normal way. Button on the dash. Fob in your pocket, like every morning. Gwen Harlow took the key. She got into her own car. She put the fob in her jacket. And she pressed the start button the ordinary way, the way that hadn't worked in 3 days. And the Ferrari roared to life on the first press. Because now it could hear its key the way it was supposed to, from across the cabin, the way it had every day before a $1.50 battery quietly died. 30 seconds. A drugstore battery. A $400,000 car, fixed. Somebody had been keeping time on a phone, the way somebody always is. They didn't even announce it. They just stared at it. That's it? Gwen said, over the idle, and her voice was strange. That's 3 days. and 5 experts, and $500,000, and it was a battery in the key. It was a battery in the key, Pete agreed. He closed his bag. You were looking for the answer in the engine. It was in your purse the whole time. He said it gently, but it landed like a verdict. Half the things people tear their lives apart looking for are like that. Sitting right where they already are. Too small and too close to see. He took Rosie's hand. Anyway, that's 30 seconds. I'll let you all get back to it. And he turned to leave, actually turned to leave. The man who had just won $500,000 walking toward the exit, as though the money had never been said out loud, and that was the moment Gwen Harlow's entire model of human nature began to come apart. Stop, Gwen said. Where are you going? Home, Pete said. It's Saturday. We get pancakes on Saturdays. Don't we? Rosie nodded vigorously. You just fixed my car. I did. I offered $500,000 to anyone who could fix my car. You offered it to mechanics, Pete said, with a small smile. I'm a locksmith. I came to unlock a Mercedes. He nodded back toward the lot. Customer already paid me for that. $85. I'm square. And Gwen Harlow stood in the middle of her own dealership and felt the floor tilt. Because the man was not negotiating. This was the thing her whole life had not prepared her for. She knew negotiation. She was the best in the world at it. The humble routine. The oh, I couldn't possibly. The dance that drives the number up, she'd have respected that. She'd have known what it was. But Pete Nowak wasn't dancing. He genuinely intended to walk out the door without the money. He had fixed a $500,000 problem, and he was going home to make pancakes. And the $500,000 simply did not enter into it for him. And Gwen could not compute it. Because if it was real, if a person could do that, then the one thing she had built her entire life and fortune and worldview on, the bedrock certainty that everyone has a price, had a man standing in the middle of it holding a canvas bag and a little girl's hand, disproving it. Everyone has a price, she heard herself say, out loud, almost to herself. Pete actually stopped at that. He turned around, and he looked at her, not offended, but with a kind of sympathy that made it worse. That's a sad way to walk around, he said quietly. I'm not saying it to be cute. It just sounds like a lonely thing to believe. He set the bag back down. Look, I'm not a saint. I like money fine. If you want to pay me a fair locksmith's fee for a fob battery and a service call, I'll take it. Gladly. Couple $100. But $500,000 for 30 seconds? That's not pay. That's a fortune for being in the right place. And the second I take a fortune for 30 seconds, I become a guy who'd take advantage of a desperate person. And I don't want to be that guy. Mostly because of her. He nodded at Rosie. She's watching everything I do. She's gonna learn what a person is from watching me. So I can't be the guy who takes the $500,000. Not in front of her. Not ever, really. Why? Gwen said. It came out almost desperate. Why would you? Most people would take it. Yeah, Pete agreed. And I wouldn't blame him. But you keep saying everyone has a price like it's a law of physics. And I think you've just had a run of meeting people who proved it to you. So let me tell you about somebody who didn't. He looked at his daughter. 5 years ago, I walked into an agency as a single guy and took home a 2-year-old that the world had already started giving up on. And I did it for nothing. There's no angle. There's no return. People asked me what I got out of it, like there had to be something. There wasn't anything. There was a kid who needed a dad, and I had the love sitting around. That's the whole transaction. No price, he shrugged. There's a lot more of us out here than you think. We're just easy to miss. Same as the battery and the key. And Rosie, sensing something, walked over to the woman in the expensive suit and held up the thing she'd been holding in her other hand, the whole time a slightly squashed granola bar from her dad's bag, and offered it to her. You can have my snack, Rosie said. You seem sad. Gwen Harlow, who could not remember the last time a person had given her something without wanting something back, took the granola bar from a 7-year-old's hand and discovered she could not speak. She paid him $200 for the service call, and he took it, because that was fair. And fair was the whole point. But the $500,000 sat there in the room like an unanswered question. And Gwen Harlow, who had never in her life left an incentive on the table, found that she could not just put it away. Not because she needed to spend it, because something had cracked, and through the crack she could see, for the first time in 20 years, how much she'd been missing. "I want to give the $500,000, she said. "I do. I can't make you take it, and I understand now why you won't, and I respect it, more than I have words for. But I have the money sitting here, earmarked, and I can't just..." She stopped. "Tell me where it should go. You'd know better than I would. Where does $500,000 actually do what you just did for free?" Pete thought about it. He looked at Rosie. "The kid's still in the system," he said. "The ones nobody's come for yet. The agencies are always broke, and the kids are always waiting, and most of them age out without anybody ever..." He stopped, his voice catching for just a second on something private. "Give it to them. Help some single guy with a quiet life and too much love figure out he's allowed to walk through that door. Help a kid like she was get a Saturday with pancakes." He picked his bag back up. "That's where it does what you're asking." And Gwen Harlow did it. Not as a tax strategy, not as a press release, not as the kind of calculated giving she'd done before. That was really just incentives pointed at her own reputation. She did it the way Pete had fixed the car for the thing itself. Her first genuinely free act in 2 decades. The beginning, though she didn't know it yet, of a long and awkward and deeply needed re-education in the one subject her brilliance had never let her learn, that the machinery she saw under everyone wasn't the whole story. That incentives move most people most of the time, and that's real, but that there are people, more than she'd let herself believe, who help for free, who love without an angle, who do the obvious thing because water runs downhill. She had spent her life paying everyone's price up front, so she'd never be surprised. A locksmith and a 7-year-old had just surprised her, and it was the best thing that had happened to her in years. She even, eventually, changed how she ran levers slowly, imperfectly, started treating the people who worked for her as people and not just behavior to be engineered. It did not make her soft. It made her, for the first time, someone the people around her would have helped for free. Pete Nowak drove home in his van with his daughter, and they made pancakes for dinner, because it was Saturday, and that was the law. And at some point Rosie asked him why the sad lady had cried when she gave her the granola bar. "Because somebody gave her something and didn't want anything back," Pete said, "and she'd forgotten that happens." Rosie thought about this. Syrup on her chin. "That's an easy thing to remember," she said. "It happens all the time." "It does," Pete said, looking at the kid the world had once started giving up on, who had grown up giving her snack away to sad strangers. "You're right. It happens all the time. Some people just have to be reminded. There is a belief that the world will try very hard to sell you, and it sounds like wisdom, and it is poison. The belief is that everyone has a price, that underneath every kindness there's an angle, under every gift an invoice, under every good deed a calculation. The world will offer you plenty of evidence for it, because the people who do have a price are loud, and the betrayals are memorable, and if you've been burned enough times it starts to feel like the only safe thing to assume." Gwen Harlow built a fortune on that belief, and protected herself with it for 20 years, paying everyone's price up front so that no one could ever surprise her with it again. And then a locksmith fixed her car in 30 seconds and went home to make pancakes, and a 7-year-old gave her a granola bar because she looked sad, and the belief that had organized her entire life simply could not survive contact with them. Because here is the thing the cynics never account for. The man fixed the car with a battery from a drugstore, a small, humble $1.50 answer that 5 brilliant experts missed, because it was too small for the room, because they were looking for a problem worthy of the price tag, because the answer was sitting right where she already was, in her own purse, too close to see. And the bigger answer was the same shape. The thing Gwen had spent 20 years and $4 billion insisting didn't exist. A person who helps for free, who loves without an angle, turned out to be standing right in front of her, holding a canvas bag and a little girl's hand. Too humble to be believed, too close to see. There the whole time. He took $200 because that was fair. He left $500,000 on the table because some things were never for sale, and he wanted his daughter to grow up knowing the difference. Not everyone has a price. The ones who don't are just easy to miss, like a battery and a key.